Brought to you by bedroombattlefields.com, this is the Tabletop Miniature Hobby Podcast.
Hi, my name's Jervis Johnson, and the person that I would choose to play a miniatures game with would be Charles Grant Sr., to be precise. When I was growing up, Charles Grant wrote the first set of wargames rules I ever played, Battle Practical Wargaming, and he used to write the most magnificent battle reports in Military Modelling magazine. All of these things were hugely influential and inspirational for me as a games designer. They influenced a lot of the things that I did when I worked at Games Workshop. In fact, when I started writing standard bearer articles and the J files, I tried to write in a similar style to Charles Grant to start with, because I just loved his writing style. He managed to explain the spirit and the ethos of games so well in his writing. But I never got to meet him in real life, and I never got to play a game against him. And to do so would be an absolute dream come true for me. So that's who I would play a game against. It would be Charles Grant Sr.
It's episode 100 of the Tabletop Miniature Hobby Podcast, and a huge thanks to Jervis Johnson for kicking us off there. That was our question of the month for September, but I took the opportunity to invite some of my hobby heroes to muse over it for the purposes of this episode. Later on, you're going to hear answers to that same question from Joe McCullough, Trish Carden, Mike Hutchinson, and Rick Priestley. Unfortunately, Barry Gibb didn't respond to my emails. Seeing as Mr. Johnson had the first word though, I had his old White Dwarf adversary Andy Chambers on the show last year, and I couldn't possibly resist asking him the question, did Jervis ever beat you?
Many times. We talked about this because it kind of bothered him after a while that it never even crossed my mind, because we used to play a lot, virtually daily when we could, but not always, but certainly weekly. And we did the first few battle reports, and it kind of became a thing. They were very, very popular. This is in White Dwarf magazine for people just tuning in. And they were very popular, so it was like, brilliant, do more of those. People love them. And we're like, all right. So we started regularly doing a battle report for White Dwarf in once a month. And it never even crossed my mind, because I say we played a lot, and Jervis generally beat me. Not always, but quite often. He always came with a good army list and a good plan in mind. And I never had a plan. I just had an army and let chaos reign and work from there, basically. But after a while, he came to me and sort of said, it bothered me for a while that you always beat me in the battle reports, but I'm over it now. And it never even crossed my mind before that moment, frankly, that was happening. And I was like, And it made me think about it, why that happened. And it's because the battle reports were always really chaotic affairs, because we had to stop and start, we had to take photos, we had to take notes. People would wander by all the time and give their sage advice to what we should be doing in the game and all this sort of stuff. And then we'd break for lunch, we'd come back and finish. So it was a hugely fractured game that we had to play in practice. And of course, that worked for me because I thrive on chaos, basically. And I didn't really have a plan in the first place. I'm just sort of like taking advantage of what's happening and doing sensible things. Whereas Jervis came in with a plan, and the plan kind of always fell apart because he couldn't keep concentration on that as well as keep notes and well as take photos and all the other interruptions and stuff like that. So I think that's what screwed him over more than anything else, as well as just luck as well. I tended to be quite lucky on the dice. So he ended up with this thing where it's like, people with T-shirts on saying Jervis Johnson couldn't beat me either and stuff like this, which was still very hilarious, but a bit harsh on him because honestly, no, he's a great player. He beat me all the time, just not in a battle report because extraneous circumstances meant that I was better at doing those than he was. But not through talent or anything like that, just through, as I say, I thrive on chaos, and that's true when I game in general. I don't generally have a plan.
Another guest on the show last year was the legendary Alessio Cavatore. Here's a wee clip from that episode where he talks about his game design ethos.
There is not such thing as too simple a game. So I always have this argument where I go simpler, cut, and I go like, no, you need a bit of grit, you need a bit of granularity, you need a bit of. I don't like those words. I just go, no, I disagree entirely. I think simple is always better. Some people use the word simplistic, and I sort of go, no, I think that, again, no, there is simple, which is good. Simplistic implies that simple can be bad. I was like, I disagree. That's obviously a radical position. It's referring to the holy grail of game design, which is chess, in my opinion, in the sense, not that chess particularly being the ultimate game, but in terms of when you play chess, you're not thinking about the rules. You're not thinking, oh, how does the pawn move? How can, if the bishop that can the knight then do this? Or, I don't know, maybe I should check the rules. And your brain is not thinking of the rules. The brain is thinking of the game. You're thinking, so if I attack on the left, if I do this, and then I support it with this, then I become stronger here. And so you're playing the battle, you're playing the thing. The rules don't exist. They're not in your head. You're not using any iota of power, brain power on the rules. So for me, that's the holy grail. It would be to have a war game where you don't think of the rules. The rules are in, and nobody thinks of the rules. You're thinking of the game, right? Obviously, for wargaming in particular, with so many variable and not a grid, it is not. I don't think it's possible, but is nice to aspire to.
And now here's Tuomas Pirinen answering the question, why do you think this hobby still exists?
I think you look at the history, because of course the modern wargaming, you could say that's Wells's Little Wars. But of course you look at the history to the ancient civilizations. They had their own versions of this hobby. They had the games of strategy and beautifully crafted pieces representing armies. I also think that the huge resurgence we've seen in physical games is that as our world goes really digital, we are at the end of the day, it's we are flesh and bone. We crave the reality of physical things, books, miniatures that we can touch with our hands. That not everything is this thing that only exists in the cyberspace. Again, I'm not criticizing. There are great many things that have come out of the revolution in the technology, but I think the social aspect is huge. There is less and less face-to-face contact, but a tabletop game is getting together with your friends and interacting them is as nature intended us in these small groups is going together. I think it's very healthy for us. Like the studies say that we separate very early age fiction and reality, and it's very good for us to explore areas in fiction that are not and shouldn't be part of our lives, like war. We love the idea, concept of competition, the combat, but of course all of us know that we should avoid war at any cost. But it allows the worlds of fiction, allows the thrill of this great conflict and engaging your imagination. I think in the case of Games Workshop, the foundational work we talked about with John and Rick and others, there is stories, characters, the Imaginarium there that just engages your brain and stays there. You know, when John announces retirement, I posted a couple of things, and I said, insane number of people used this and commented. And the thing is that they all remember, usually several, but at least one like seminal piece that's in the back of your mind. I think there are characters we've written and the games we've written that you played, and there was this incredible experience that you just go with you, that you don't really get anywhere else. It's it's a combination of art. You being engaged yourself and doing stuff. It's the modeling, painting. It's the many people draw. It's the because of it. It's the writing. I think it's memorable, and the people find it enjoyable. And I don't think it's a kind of experience which, by its nature, is very difficult to truly digitalize. At the end of the day, you can't hold and get physical paints and paint something in digital space. You can do a great many things, but not that. But like everything, I mean, people always ask me about Mordheim. Why does it endure? And I said, you tell me. You guys keep playing it. There is no official support. It's it's played by more people now than ever. It's so it has to be the product itself. It's because I can't force anybody to play a game I made. That's a conscious choice. And for them to keep playing it is, again, they do it because they enjoy it. So your answer is it's you guys. It's your fault why it's enjoyed. You keep playing this stuff we come up with.
Gav Thorpe now on something hobby related he's recently changed his mind about.
For a long time, and working at Games Workshop for years, and amongst sort of like incredible painters and artists and things. So it was always what was presented was the most aspirational version of what was, what's termed the Games Workshop hobby. So, beautifully painted miniatures over amazingly modelled battlefields. And that was always in my head as the goal. It was to try and recreate that for myself. But of course, not being a professional heavy metal painter, not being a professional design studio scenery maker, whatever, it's actually, it took a while, I think, for me to refocus and onto what I think I want to do and achieve and play and things like that for my own enjoyment, and to a level that I feel is acceptable, but actually not insane. So I guess, it's perfect. It's sort of like was fairly hammered into me. And again, as aspiration of it's like, don't play with unpainted models. You don't play with sort of like proxies and things like that. And particularly because I am very big on the aesthetic of miniatures gaming. That's the point of using miniatures, is they look great, and if you've got like a tin can pretending to be a dreadnought or something like that, then it takes away from that aesthetic. I've never been necessarily like just purely focused on the game aspect of the games. So that I still have an element of that, but actually, particularly because I'm so bad at finishing stuff and then come to those realizations of like, no, you know what? It's okay to put some grey plastic on the table now and again. If you want to try something out and use something as something else, that's fine. So I've become less hardcore, I suppose, in terms of like what the perfect game is and what people should aspire to and do. Which means that I actually get to play a few more games and a few different things, because I don't have to have like a completely finished painted force to do this thing, or I don't, because it was preventing me actually enjoying stuff, because I wouldn't play until, like, say, I'd finished painting 20 models for that game or whatever, which meant I didn't get around to playing it and people had moved on to something else, or I'd moved on to something else. So yeah, remembering the game part of gaming as well as the aesthetic side of it has been a bit of a journey for me.
Asked a similar question to Andy Chambers too. What did he once believe about the hobby that turned out not to be true?
One thing I used to believe about the hobby that turned out not to be true: I-Go systems are good. Which, I don't know, on some fundamental level, I kind of sort of believe that, but I used to passionately believe it and fight back against every attempt to do other things. Because I thought it was good for you to be able to use your whole army and, work to a plan, ironically enough. And then the opponent used theirs. But actually, in practice, most of the time it's a bad idea, because it kind of disassociates one person at a time from having much of an active role in the game for too long. And as I've got older and perhaps a little bit wiser, I've realised that's important. You've got two people at the table, you need to make sure they're both having a good time, two or more people at the table. And you need to make sure they're both having a good time on a reasonable sort of tempo. And you go often fights against that, unless it's such a limited number of units that you can get through your turn very quickly, or the increments are really tiny, or both. So there are circumstances where you still do it, but Am I as committed to it as I once was? No, I am not. A lot of crunch, actually, to be fair, that I inflicted on gamers back in the 90s when I was working on things like 40k. These days, I wouldn't do that now because, crunch, by which I mean, lots of modifiers, lots of die rolling, comparing die rolling, having to do maths in relation to your dice and things like that. It was something I just didn't hesitate about back then. I just thought, oh, cool. Different way of doing things. And that in itself as well, too many different ways of doing things. These are all kind of bad, actually, as part of a design. You need to be a lot more disciplined about it. And I mean, referencing back to Jervis again, that's one of the things I admire him for. He is very disciplined about factors like that and considering it properly, which is something I've learned to do over time. But I didn't used to. Sorry about that, guys. It was kind of made fun, wacky games, though. I'll give it that much.
Hello, Matthew. It's Gasland's Mike here. Congratulations on our century of the podcast. The person, living or dead, that I would love to play a miniatures game with is Peter Cushing, famed British horror movie actor. I know that he was an enthusiastic painter of miniatures, and there's some film clips somewhere of him playing Little Wars, H.G. Wells' game, on the floor of his Kensington apartment. I live in Kent, fairly near the sea, and so did Peter Cushing in his latter days. And I had a go last year when some of his stuff came up for auction at a local auction house, and some of his painted Roman miniatures came up for auction. So I had a little bid on those, but they were outside my price range in the end. So I should love to play. I've never played Little Wars by H.G. Wells, so I should like Peter Cushing to teach me that. And then perhaps I could teach him my game Perilous Tales, and he and I could hunt Dracula in a cooperative setting. So yeah, anyway, cheerio.
Here's Trish Carden.
I'd like to answer this most difficult of questions. Who would I pick to play a game with? I've thought long and hard about this. So many people that I could have chosen, from authors to pop stars to film actors, environmentalists, so many. But when it comes down to it, the one I'd choose would be somebody that nobody else would know. An old friend of mine who sadly died about 8 years ago. We'd been friends since we were 2 years old. Very close friends, more like a brother to me. My friend Alan. He was fiercely intelligent. He was the most perceptive of people. A most wonderful writer with a vicious, wicked, hilarious wit to him. You didn't want to be on his wrong side. And I miss him terribly. And we spent so many hours together just putting the world to rights, talking about anything and everything till early hours of the morning, laughing and just generally, talking about the world, about our lives, about our futures, everything that you would want from a wonderful friend. We had the same taste in men, which always used to amuse us greatly. We had the same taste in literature. We had the same taste in so many things, but we were so different in many other ways. And having somebody like that in your life makes such a huge difference. It's almost like having yourself reflected back to you. And I would love to be able to play a game with him now. I would love to be able to sit. And I think something like D&D, although I've never been much of a gamer, I played 2 games of Warhammer, I think, in my life. Ridiculous considering I made so many figures for it over the years. The main game I always used to play was Talisman. But in the case of playing with Alan, I think it would have to be something like D&D or CNS, something that along those lines, where we could tell a story, where we could get involved, where we could be a different character, we could make it up as we went along and just get into all sorts of scrapes and just thoroughly enjoy ourselves. And it would probably go on for weeks. It would involve a lot of hilarity. It would involve a lot of just genuine good times. And we would learn something from it as well. You know, that was always the thing with somebody with a friendship like we had. We always learned new things about each other. We always pushed each other's boundaries. And I think in gaming as well as in life, that's important. You push boundaries, you see what you're capable of, you make decisions that are right, you make decisions that are wrong. But at the end of it, you come away having had a wonderful time. Whether you win or lose, you've learned something. And that in gaming and in friendship and life is important. So that's who I would choose. Wish we could do it. But sadly, it won't happen now. But anyway, I hope you all have somebody like that in your lives that you can play a game with and just be yourselves with. No judgment, no pressures to be anything other than what you are. So anyway, yes, that's who I'd choose. So I know you said we could give a shout out for what we're doing now. If you want to visit Footsore Miniatures and have a look at my Harrowhurst range, that would be wonderful. Anyway, thanks everybody for listening, and have a good gaming day.
Here's Joe McCullough.
I'm really fortunate that through my employment with Osprey, I've gotten to hang out and game with a lot of the big names in kind of the British wargaming scene. So Rick Priestley, the Perry brothers, all the guys from Warlord, Alessio. And that's just been really incredible. So those probably would have been my first pick years ago. But in the situation I'm in now, I guess I would look back to kind of my earliest days of gaming back when I was in the US. And so if I had to pick somebody now, actually there's probably a couple I would choose. So the first would be Steve Jackson, the American Steve Jackson, game designer. Did a lot of the games that influenced me early on. So he designed or co-designed Car Wars, Ogre, Illuminati, the GURPS role-playing game, and Munchkin, now he's probably most famous for. So just as kind of a game designer influence on me, it'd be amazing to hang out with him and roll some dice with him. Another guy who I'd be really interested, maybe less to game with than to just sit down and talk to, although I'd love to game with them also, is Jordan Wiseman, who probably most famously in our kind of world designed BattleTech, but has kind of been a serial entrepreneur and game designer. So is also responsible for games like Crimson Skies, HeroClix, and Pirates of the Spanish Main, all of which are not only fun games, but each of them in their own way kind of changed the way I thought about gaming and the possibilities of gaming. So you've got a collectible miniatures game, and you've got a game that was actually of little boats constructed out of cards and different things like that. And so I just think he'd be a really interesting guy to kind of pick his brains. So while I'm pretty happy to sit down and roll dice with anybody, those are two guys that I'd really enjoy talking to and hanging out with.
I launched this show with no real plan or expectations back on the 13th of August 2021, and in that time period there's been a couple of major life-changing events, and that's to put it mildly. The first was the birth of my daughter, which was undoubtedly the best moment of my life, and then almost exactly a year later I tragically lost my wee brother to suicide. Naturally, that's still something that's very difficult for myself and my family to deal with. I think about him every day, and I'm sure I always will. There's a great photo of me and him on what I'm sure is Christmas Day 1992, where I've just opened up my brand new Battle Masters box and I've started to snap the miniatures out of their sprues by hand. So I've no doubt that if I could play any game with anyone, I'd relive that morning and push some troops around that big vinyl mat with my wee brother. With that said, I'm very lucky to have a brilliantly intelligent and inquisitive 3-year-old in the house now who's already embracing the story worlds of Narnia, Robin Hood and The Labyrinth. So I'll hopefully squeeze a few games out of her before she decides it's no longer cool to hang out with her dad. And I doubt that'll be very long, to be quite honest with you. Anyway, thanks so much for listening to this humble podcast, whether you've been with it from the beginning or if this is your very first listen. I appreciate the small but fantastic community that's grown around it and all the folks I've met and became friends with along the way. We've heard some incredible clips from some incredible people today, and I'm very grateful to have them involved. And now there's very much a last but not least contribution to play us out. Once again, this has been episode 100 of the Tabletop Miniature Hobby Podcast.
Hello there, it's Rick Priestley here, and I've been asked who I'd like to play, live or dead, and what game would we play? And I was thinking about this, and I have to admit that the person or people I'd most likely to play are the people that I play, who are all currently alive, obviously, and the games I enjoy playing more than any, I think, are both Black Powder and Hail Caesar, which are both games I wrote, which is a little unkind, isn't it? But thinking about it overall, you go, well, who would you like to play? And, you immediately think about Alexander the Great and Napoleon and so on and so forth, and you think, well, it's a bit silly, really, isn't it? I mean, none of them are war gamers at the end of the day. I think if I were to answer the question honestly, I'd say actually the person I'd like to play who I can no longer play would be my good friend Richard Halliwell, because sadly Richard died. It was about 3 years ago now, and at the age of 60, which is not old, and he'd been ill for a very long time. So we'd not really wargamed for many years prior to that. Richard was not really very well at all in the end, and he couldn't game at all. But when we were teenagers, we played regularly. We were regular partners, and we both collected armies to oppose each other and other friends. But often it was Richard and I that took the lead, and we would kind of come up with something, or we'd develop an enthusiasm for something and start collecting armies for it, and then other people would pick up on it. And all the time I played Richard, I can only recall beating him once, which is terrible, isn't it? Which was playing the WRG Ancient Naval War game. But I don't think I'll choose that one, because it was odd. It was one of those odd things, because whereas Richard inevitably beat me at everything else, I inevitably beat him at that. And I wouldn't like to resurrect him simply for the pleasure of beating him one last time. So I'll plumb for the other game that we played a lot in various editions, which is the WRG Ancients. Not a game played much these days, rather old-fashioned in its precepts. It involves written orders, simultaneous movement, and lots of tables and factors and things like that. So worse, I'll say I'd play that. The reality is, I'm not sure I'd have the patience to play it. But if we're going to bring Hal back to play, then we have to bring my younger self back to play as well. So I would say that's my answer, and it would be a kind of a double whammy, really, because the person I'd like to play is no longer with us, but the person I'd like to be to play him is also no longer with us in a sense. So there you go. It's Richard Halliwell, God bless him, and WRG Ancients.